Hi, this is Craig Stocks, and this is my photo critique of the day. Thank you for joining me. Today's photo was provided by Gary Tipsworth, so Gary, thank you so much for sharing your photo. This is obviously a still life of a feather, and Gary did include a little bit of the story that he placed the feather on a piece of glass that was suspended over a piece of construction paper, so that's how the image was constructed. And this is really a great example of pre-visualization that I haven't talked to Gary about this, but I'm imagining that he came up with this idea somehow out of thin air, saw an example, something that triggered the thought, but somehow he came up with this idea and visualized a way to create the scene by placing the feather on a piece of glass, and then that allowed the shadow to be cast below the feather. And of course he can control all kinds of things about the shadow. That as he moves the light closer or farther away, that'll change the nature of the shadow. As he changes the type of light, if he uses a very small light source like just a single light bulb, for instance, that would give him a very hard edge, a clear outline of the feather. If he uses a larger light source, that creates a softer feathered edge to the shadow. So he can control the position of the shadow, he can control the nature of the shadow, he can control the density of the shadow by how much other light is available in the room. And so he's got lots of things he can control and play with the image. And I really like the way he's put it together here with the feather at an angle and then the shadow offset by quite a bit. So it causes you immediately recognize the feather, and then you realize, well, there's a shadow there, and so there's that feather floating. It really causes you to kind of look at the image and think about it, and that's really what we want with our images. We want people to look at them and think about them, and probably the worst insult to an image is to not be looked at. So to get people to look at it is always an accomplishment. A couple of thoughts on the image, some things to think about. Because the light was coming from the upper left area, casting the shadow down to the lower right, there's a little bit of a gradient on the paper. It's brighter at the top than it is at the bottom. Overall, the brightness is very good. If we look at the histogram, we can see he's got black tones that are almost black. He's got whites that are almost white. If we look at it on a white background, we can see that paper background is very bright, but yet there's texture everywhere. So very good use of exposure and brightness overall. You could correct that just a little bit by dropping in just a little bit of a gradient with the gradient adjustment tool, graduated filter, to just darken that top right or top left a little bit so that it's a little bit more even from top to bottom and left to right. As I look at the cropping, I feel like maybe there's just a little more space than we need on the edges here, so I would maybe consider cropping down from the top and in from the left a little bit, or just play with those kinds of croppings. That moves the feather a little bit away from center so that it's more obviously not centered, and puts the feather at kind of the top left third or power point of the image, and then lets the shadow fall down below it. And something fun to play with, and I don't know if you played with all these different alternatives when you were taking the picture, but I think you made some smart decisions by putting the feather at an angle, because angles always feel different than straight lines or horizontal lines or vertical lines. And by having the feather at an angle, that gives it a nice dynamic feel. And for instance, I did some playing around with this image to separate the feather from the shadow, just to explore what it would have looked like had he organized it differently. And for instance, if he had oriented the feather horizontal, notice how much different that feels. It feels much more static. It doesn't have that dynamic feeling of motion. Having the feather horizontal and the shadow horizontal and directly below the feather just doesn't feel as dynamic. So having it at an angle really gives it a much nicer feel than if he had done it the other way. The other thing that you might have explored, we've got the feather kind of pointing down into the image, and what would have happened if it was pointed the other way. So if we look at it pointed up, still at the same angle from right to left, kind of angling up into this corner, but I think that gives it a nice alternative feeling too. And if this is something that you're wanting to try more configurations, or maybe even do a series of feathers or elements with shadows, certainly it's a genre or a style that you could explore a little bit more. Perhaps even putting sets together into a set of 2 as a diptych, or sets of 3 in a triptych, with different elements, different orientations, but yet the same overall approach. But overall, I think you've done a great job with this, Gary, and thank you for submitting the image for the daily critique. I couldn't do the critiques without the photos. If you'd like to submit your photos, just send them to me in a Facebook message or by email, and I'll be happy to include them. Thanks, and have a great day.